Program Director and Director of Gender, Your Excellencies, members of the PRC, Your Excellencies, ambassadors and members of the Diplomatic Corps, representatives of the UN system, representatives of REX, representatives of CSOs, my colleagues, commissioners, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very honored to be here today to this interesting and innovative event. And I'd like to thank all of you who have participated today as the world acknowledges the role that women have played and continue to play in building societies, but also highlighting the challenges that women still face in the world in fully enjoying their fundamental rights. Women, like men, have rights, and they're entitled to human rights. And those rights include, amongst others, civil rights, political rights, economic, social, cultural, environmental rights, but also the right to peace and security. So today we must also, as we have done, look forward to how we are going to accelerate the progress that has been made. There's no doubt that progress has been made on our continent and in the world, but clearly that progress is not enough. It's not enough, it's not fast enough, it's not broad enough, it's not deep enough. So we need to do a lot more. Maybe just looking at the commission here, I think the ambassador highlighted that the commission has 50-50. Of course, the AU for some time now has moved from 30%, the Beijing 30% to 50%, because that's what parity is, not 30%. But 30% was a good starting point. Now, how do we, maybe just why is it so important? I think maybe the former president of Mozambique and the late former president of Mozambique, Samora Machel, summed it up when he told us, I will not quote exactly, that the emancipation of women is not an act of charity, but it's a fundamental prerequisite for the transformation of societies. So I think that sums it up. And so if that is so, how do we then move towards that? There was a big debate here, all the learned panelists debated. But it's true that we need laws. But I think we need to move just a step before the law, because the law does not just appear from nowhere. Somebody must champion the law. And somebody must convince the lawmakers that this law is important. If we start by how this commission came to have 50-50, it did not start with the law. It started with women lobbying. Women who were not in the commission. Started with women who were outside the commission from Africa lobbying for this. They lobbied first the few foreign ministers who were there who were women. Then they lobbied ambassadors, foreign ministers. They lobbied heads of state. so that the heads of state, the foreign ministers, the ambassadors understood why it was important to have a commission like that. And then when that decision was taken, that we must have a commission that has 50% women, but now came the implementation that was the big debate here. And I had the misfortune at that time of chairing the panel that had to implement that. And I will tell you that first, regions were supposed to submit names of those that they are putting forward for each position of commission, 2 per region. And each one had to submit 50-50, so that there is enough pool of women from each region to choose from for each position. The first hurdle as that panel and as the chair of that panel was that only 2 regions at the time submitted women. The other 3 didn't. So we said, what do we do? So as the chair, I said to the Executive Council, well, this is now the law, that there must be 50% women, 50% men. And if there is a and when we asked why, they said they don't have women who can take those positions. So we said, okay, if you don't have women, then it means you can't fill the quota that is supposed to be for women. Then for those, we will go to regions that say they have women. Then you'll have to explain to your own constituencies why your region only has 1 commissioner, a man, when others have more than 1, but they include women. It was only when we took that stand as that committee that if you do not bring women, you'll only have 1 commissioner from your region. And the women quota cannot be filled by men. So if you can't find women in your region, we will find women in other parts of the continent where there are women. Because it was just unthinkable that a continent at that time, which had almost close to 800 million people, could not produce 5 women to fill the commission quota. But I'm just saying, it's important to have the law, but we must have the resolve to implement it. So even in countries, how does an electoral commission, or whatever it's called, accept a list that does not have 30% when the law says there must be 30%? It means the Electoral Commission is not doing it's not playing its role properly. Because if there is a law that says 30%, then the Electoral Commission must make sure that political parties adhere to that. Secondly, we cannot abdicate our responsibility to the Electoral Commission alone. The first step is in the political parties. In the political parties, that's where these lists are made, these candidates are presented to the commission. But in the political parties, there are also women. It is the responsibility of women and progressive men in those political parties to make sure that that happens. If women are not active in the political parties, it will not happen. So women plus progressive men must be active in the political parties. We can't say politics is not for us and then hope that things will just happen. They will not. So it's very important for us as the commission, but for all of us, to ensure that we encourage women, that women participate first and foremost in their political parties. That's where manifestos are written, and that's where campaigns are undertaken. In my own organization back home, when we wanted 30%, they didn't want to grant us 30%. So when the first election in '94 came, we then said to the party as women activists, if we do not put 30% women in parliament, we are not going to campaign. And in my organization, women are they are the ones who volunteer most. They are the majority of the membership. And we said, we're not going to campaign because what's in it for women in this parliament? Because if we don't have a critical mass of women in parliament, it means we will not have laws that are sensitive, because there'll be no critical mass to push for those laws. So, of course, the party wanted to win. The majority, like in any country, of voters are women. So if women in the ruling party say we're not participating, that's a big problem. So they had to then say, okay, we'll have 30%. And then we said, okay. Then the list came. The women were after they were after the 60%. If we were going to win 60%, there were very few women in the first 60%. So we then insisted again that we have to make sure that the list that goes to parliament, whatever percentage this party wins, will have 30%. So we'll have to have a zebra of 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. Then when we changed to 50%, which is now 50% in the ruling party, now it's a zebra of 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. Because if we don't do that, the list will go, it will have 50% women, but the 50% will be in the last 50%. And so the party wins 60%, then you find that only 10% is women. So, but we have to, as women, be ready to rock the boat. Because half the time, as women, oh no, we want other people to speak for us. We must be prepared to rock the boat. And we must be prepared to be those women that when you stand, they say, oh, here she comes again with the women's issue. It's fine. It's fine. Let them say so, but let them, in the end, implement what we need. There are progressive men, because even here at the Commission, the majority of PRC members are men. The majority of the executive are men. The vast majority, almost 100% of heads of state are men. So for that to have happened, it means progressive men bought into that. So it's very important to have these progressive men, because if we don't work with them, things won't happen. Okay, today I'm standing here as the chair of the commission. Who was voting? There was only one woman amongst the heads of state who voted. So clearly, it was progressive men who did vote. So it's very important. It's very important to make sure that we lobby, we work with progressive men in our political parties, in our organizations, in everything. We work with them, but not just, and we make them understand that it's not a favor. They are not doing us a favor. Because if we make them understand that it's a favor, favors are given, favors are withdrawn, favors are given when we feel like. So they have to understand it's our rights. So I just thought I should just say a few of those things, maybe just add my penny's worth to the debate. And of course, we've seen directors here, departments pledge. A pledge is a pledge. What mechanism are we going to put in place to make sure that they do what they pledged? I don't know. We have to work with the commission, with the staff association, with everybody, but we must make sure that part of the assessment includes these pledges, because we can't start a process where somebody pledges and then walks away from that pledge. So the directors and commissioners must make sure that those pledges are implemented. Because otherwise then we can make pledges every year, every day, and nothing will happen because there are no consequences when you don't put that. But also, there was a question of culture. How do we change the culture? Because indeed, mindset needs to be changed. But again, political parties need to lead that change. I remember when, I'll just use the example of South Africa because I know it well. When the first group of parliamentarians went to parliament, there were lots of comments. What do these women know about parliament? But every African in South Africa had never been to parliament. We were voting as Africans for the first time. But the comments were, what do these women know about parliament? What are they going to do in parliament? As though men are born, it's genetic. This knowledge is genetic. It's not acquired. Because if it's acquired, men and women can acquire it equally. But as those women who went to parliament for the first time, we made a pledge to ourselves that we are going to work so hard that in the next election, nobody should ask about what women are going to do in parliament. They will know. Because we had to ensure that we create role models, but also convince society by our actions that it is cool to actually have women in parliament. And then, in the executive, the first cabinet had only 2 women ministers, and I had the privilege to be one of them. And we sat, the 2 of us, and said, we have to work very hard so that nobody says, you see, you give this to women, look at what they are doing. Because working hard will open doors for other women. It will make it possible for President Mandela to say, okay, women are doing well, let's bring more. But we didn't end there. The women in the ANC challenged the President Mandela and said, President, how do you have 2 women in the cabinet? And he then said, okay, as you will remember, that cabinet was a mixture of parties, not just ANC. But he said, whenever I get an opportunity to appoint a woman, I will. Of course, he ended up with doubling that number. But then in the next parliament, there were about 40% women in cabinet. So we have to work in a multi-pronged way. But women themselves, when they are in those positions, must ensure that they open up for women. Because sometimes you have women who come in and they say, I've made it in the men's world, and they forget that there are women who need to make it in a human world, because we need to make this world human, not a man's world. So it's important that we do that, but it's also very difficult. I can tell you in this commission, it's so difficult just to get people to, they're supposed to submit 3 names. The chair does not get involved in recruitment, in interviews. The chairperson gets 3 names that he or she can choose from for any position. So, you know what I get? I get three names. 2, either 3 are men, all 3, or 2 are men, and it says next to the men, pass, and then the 3rd woman is failed. So clearly, either way, there are 3 men, it means I have to choose 1 woman. There are 3 women, the woman has failed. Why she's on the list, only God knows. So now I've had to say, if there is no woman in your list that has passed, then I don't consider that list. In some instances, we've had to send the list back twice from 1 department or from 1 unit because they are not ready to put women. Of course, then the problem comes. Why are you taking so long to fill in positions? So there are those challenges that you face, but unless you take a decisive decision that, okay, I will not, if I appoint a man, it should be because it's a choice to appoint that man. It's not because there is no possibility of appointing a woman. So I'm just saying this is everywhere. It's structural, but you have to make sure that you implement, even if, because there is a decision that the commission must also have women in it. But unless you have ways of implementing, before I sit down, I must just give you another example. In South Africa, during the opening of Parliament, you have different pillars of government coming in, parliamentarians, the executive, the judiciary, and of course the provinces. So the judiciary is led by the judge presidents. If each province has a judge president, and then the judge president of the Constitutional Court and so on. So year after year, these judges were walking in, and they were all men. Until, as women in Parliament, we decided, no, this must stop. Yes, the judiciary is independent, but they must adhere to the policies of the country. So one year, we decided we're going to boo them when they come in. And we're going to say, where are the women? Where are the women? Where are the women? And we did that. The following year, they had 1 woman, and now the following year, they had 1 woman or 2, but they were not judge presidents. They had just taken them to avoid the booing. But then subsequently, when they had opportunities of appointing women judge presidents, then they appointed. So you have to be activist, you have to be strategic, your tactics, everything. You have to use everything. But this debate was very interesting, and the pledges, I hope we can say that they are not empty pledges, and that we can do everything possible, both as the Commission, but also at member state level, to ensure that women are able to exercise their right and are not looked at as charity cases, that you bring them in as a way of patronage, that it is their right. But let me also thank the young people who performed here and their instructors, because I think it's a very important aspect of bringing up, especially girls, that they must be brought up to be confident, to be able to defend themselves. I read one book by a psychologist who was analyzing, amongst other things, there was an analysis of when a robber approaches a person or people, what do they look at? One of the things they were arguing is that it's just the way, even just the way you walk. If you walk with confidence, they are probably not going to come to you. But if you have a timid look and a timid kind of, then they'll probably come to you. And they were saying training women in martial arts and all these things gives them that confidence that even when they walk the street, a robber looks at them and says, and looks elsewhere. So this is very important. And actually, even when they've robbed you, we were burying my aunt on Saturday, my father's sister. And one of the things we remembered about her is that once they took her purse from her handbag. And then she could hear that something was happening, and by the time she looked, the young man had run away with her purse. So, but she saw him walking, and then he stood behind a pole innocently. So my aunt went round and round, then eventually decided to go to him. And when he got there, he saw her purse and others. So he said to this young man, "Hey, that's my purse." Then this young man he said, "Which one?" He says, "This one is mine. Please, can I have it?" And this young man gave it back to her, and then she walked away. And then after a few steps, she went back to him and said, "What did you think I was going to use to pay for the bus back home?" And this young man was startled and said, "No, I was going to give you bus fare." So it just shows that I think this young man got worried when this old lady came confidently to him and decided, "No, I'm not going to argue." So I think it's very important. But of course, collectively, I presume that every man that is in this room is progressive. Otherwise, you would not have wanted to spend your time in this room, in this event. And if you came and you were not, I hope by the time you leave, you are. So all the women and progressive men who are here, we must collectively work together to create a society where men and women feel free, are equal, and they can do, and they can have choices. Because whether you go to parliament or not should be a choice. It should not be because you are bad. Whether you become the chief of staff of the defense force should be a choice and not because we are bad, because we are a woman. So thank you very much for being here. And I'll just close by quoting the late Thomas Sankara, who said, "We must have the courage to turn our backs on the old formulas." So moving forward, we must look at new formulas that include women as equals. He didn't say that, I'm adding that. Then he said, the courage to invent the future. And I hope part of what we were doing here was inventing that future. And then he ended by saying, we must dare to invent the future. Thank you.